Ask any sim racer, ask any real sim racer, and they'll tell you it doesn't matter what wheelbase you buy as long as you get a good set of pedals. But I want to know, is that really true? So for the last 7 months, I've been using the Fanatec CSL DD, but I haven't been using the boost kit. I actually waited 7 whole months just to order the boost kit, just to make sure that I would continue to drive on a wheel at 5 Newton meters and that it would have the kind of impact I needed it to have to do the test we're going to do today. Pretty experienced on road Atlanta. I feel like I'm fairly quick and I'm definitely consistent on that track. So after about 20 laps or so, I should be able to get my best lap time in. And ultimately, I want to reset it, come back in 8 Newton meters, and run the course all over again and see if I can beat the time that I set from the first 20 laps in 10 laps. All right, so to give a proper explanation of how the baseline testing for the 5 Newton meter wheel went, I got to give a little bit of backstory. It's been about 2 or 3 weeks since I decided to rebuild my PC and reformat it, which means I lost 7 months worth of dialing in details and everything I had worked on to be able to get the fastest lap time possible. Now, I'm not going to get all those settings right in a day or even remember what I did to get there to begin with. So I felt that I had to use the settings that I was currently on. I didn't know what wheel settings I had in the app. I didn't know what settings I had on iRacing specifically, though there's not very many, so that one I'm pretty sure I was close on. All this to say, basically, in order to get a good baseline of what to compare to when I upgrade to 8 Newton meters, I ended up having to do a lot more laps than I expected to. Instead of doing 20, I ended up doing somewhere between 70 and 100. Now, once I had done about 70 to 100 laps, and my last 30 didn't see any improvement, I felt like I was pretty much at the pinnacle of what I was going to hit, and I had something to compare it to. All that being said, the official 5 Newton meter lap time is 122,648. That's the time to beat on the 8 Newton meter boost kit if this is going to have any impact whatsoever on my performance. Now, I feel confident that after all those laps, this is really like as good as I was going to get, especially coming out of like once you hit that many laps, it becomes absolutely exhausting. All right, so having a time to beat in mind, I bumped up the wheel to 8 Newton meters, jumped back in the rig, and took another shot at the track. Now, for the first probably 4 laps I tried to get around, it was Spin City. I mean, I was literally like every corner, every couple corners. I just couldn't get like a real connection to the car. And one of the things I realized is the wheel was giving me a lot of feedback, but it wasn't detailed enough because the wheel was just too loose in the middle. So ultimately, what I needed to do was adjust the strength of the wheel in the settings in combination with bumping it up by 3 Newton meters. Now, just a little side note for those of you who aren't too familiar with the strength of a force feedback wheel. I've been through probably like 5 different wheels in my lifetime, and each one of them's had a different level of force feedback to it. So, to kind of put things in perspective, you have 3 different kinds of wheels that are typically used. You have gear driven, belt driven, and direct drive. I started out with a gear driven Logitech, and I believe that's under 3 Newton meters of force from that wheel. I upgraded to the Thrustmaster TSXW. That maxes out at a 6 Newton meter force. But the thing is, that one is belt driven and tends to feel a little less connected than a direct drive is going to. So even though I took a step down just slightly in force with the Fanatec, I absolutely felt like there was so much more detail that that 1 Newton meter lost was not a big deal. So now going from the 5 Newton meter to the 8 Newton meter is like adding a whole nother Logitech on top of it. All right, so now that you understand that, let's talk about how the wheel performed at 8 Newton meters, or ultimately how I performed with the wheel at 8 Newton meters. So once I adjusted the strength, I decided to do this 3 different ways because I didn't really know what strength was going to be the best. So initially I increased by 2%. Then for another 10 laps, I went up another 1% because I figured, add 3 Newton meters, add 3%. That definitely didn't help for me. It became too strong and lost some of the control that I had before. So then I'm like, okay, well, if 2 was good, 3 was worse, let's see if, cutting it down by a half or a whole, down 1% makes any difference. So I did do all 3 tests, and ultimately a 2% increase to basically 14%. So 8 Newton meters of force, 14% wheel strength is where I landed at being the sweet spot, I think, based on lap times. Now, of course, y'all want to know what the lap times are. After 7 months of waiting and finally being able to boost the CSL DD, I was able to improve my lap times by about 700ths of a second. That's right, less than a tenth for all that effort and all that waiting. But there are some arguments to be made here. After 70 plus laps, I hadn't seen any improvement in my time. I also wasn't necessarily hitting my fastest time consistently. Once I dialed in the settings on the wheel, I was about 6 laps in when I achieved a 122.571. Now, that 700ths of a second may not seem like much of an improvement, but taking into account the level of fatigue and everything else that I was dealing with by the time I got to this level, I can honestly say that I feel like there is something to having a stronger wheel, and I will tell you 100% that I personally could not perform on a track the same way with a Logitech wheel that I do with the Fanatec wheel. And when I say Logitech, I'm referring to the old Logitech setups like the G920, the G27, the lower force ones. Now, new Logitech, the Pro, a whole nother story. I don't have any experience with that one, but I know it's got the force and the true force, and that thing is a whole bag of tricks in itself. But as far as talking, low powered, belt driven, gear driven wheels that are non direct drive, I think there's definitely something to that. But I think there's other factors you have to consider if you're going to look into ordering a new setup. While I would highly recommend an 8 Newton meter wheel for anybody who has the means, if you're looking into a new setup, there's quite a few other things that I think you should consider before you even think about boosting that wheel. They're going to have a lot more impact. So rather than getting an 8 Newton meter wheel, you absolutely should be going for a load cell pedal first off. In my opinion, having a proper set of pedals is absolutely necessary. Like, it's not just something people say. The difference from a load cell brake pedal to something soft and spongy is the difference between being able to be on somebody's bumper, absolutely just aggressively competitive in a race, and know that you can react to brake lights almost immediately because you know what your brake force is going to be, and you don't have some squishy pedal that's going to make you like over brake or something like that. So that's first off. Another thing that I think is a much more important investment that averages about the same as a boost kit is having a monitor with a proper refresh rate on it. 60 hertz refresh rate is good for sim racing, but 120, 165 is definitely better. Like, I honestly, for me, I notice a difference, and especially if I happen to overrun my graphics and get slowed down from 100 to 120 wherever I'm running on that track. When it drops down to about 60, I notice my response times are not as fast. Now, your brain can process those images a lot faster than you think it does. and you'll react quicker than you realize you will. And it's just one of those things that has a much bigger impact. So the long short of it is, boost kit, absolutely worth it. Tons of detail. It improves the wheel tenfold for sure. But is it absolutely necessary? No. And no, I don't think it's going to make you an incredibly faster racer. Like, yes, I think there are some performance improvements with it. You're going to see better lap times, but I don't think you're going to see seconds better lap times. Whereas with a load cell pedal, I think you really do see seconds if you're, and it is all circumstantial, obviously. If you guys find the information in these videos helpful or you appreciate the input, make sure you give me a follow. For the next video, I had a special request because since I did my original ambient light build, I've had a request or two about the upgrades that I've done to it because it's a little more involved than the initial build, and the coding and the wiring and everything is a little more technical. So I'm thinking I'll do a quick walkthrough of that in the next video, along with just a general tour of the rig and the race room because a lot's changed since the last time I did one. Like, this is a constant evolution. So if you guys want to see that video, make sure you hit that follow button. Check it out when it drops, and I'll see you next time.